So thank you so much. Thanks everyone for coming. My name is Kasey Yturralde. I work for Urban Forestry Division. This is part of the District Department of Transportation here in Washington, D.C. So we're the agency that takes care of trees. And I am the Forest Health and Community Outreach Specialist. And I work on forest health and monitoring, leading efforts to better understand and address risks such as pests, pathogens, and climate change. And I also work in community outreach, helping connect DC residents to trees in our city parks and schools. And so, let's see, here's my outline. So I'll start with kind of an introduction to climate change locally here in DC, what we can expect, and then the actions that we've taken to understand the impacts to the urban forest and actions that we can take in terms of adaptation, and then close with some recommendations. So here's just a brief introduction to our program. So we have direct management of trees on city property. So those are trees in the public right of way, like the ones you see here, lighting the street, and then trees on public parks, public schools, and other campuses like libraries. We also have a role in public space permitting. So any public space permits that involve trees, we are part of that review process. And then, of course, we have emergency response functions. So any emergency related to trees, especially, of course, during storms. And we have indirect management of all trees across the city. So those are trees on even private property through our tree ordinance. So we have a tree law that protects mature trees. An example that you can see here on the left-hand side is a large Zelkova in the front of the yard of a row house. So that would be protected as a heritage tree. And so trees, urban trees, and the urban forest play a critical role in both climate change adaptation and mitigation, and then they're themselves impacted by climate change. So the graphic here on the left just shows some of the ways which Dr. Cinnamon just talked about, that the trees are active in climate adaptation. And so mitigation, for example, in carbon sequestration, taking up carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. They are also reducing our reliance on energy, because we don't have to turn the AC on as much in the summer if we have trees surrounding us that are cooling our neighborhood. They have many important roles in climate adaptation, so cooling and shading through evapotranspiration, and just their canopy shading us. And then they are important for controlling stormwater, so the canopy is intercepting rainwater, slowing it down so that it doesn't overwhelm our city infrastructure, and then even reducing the amount of stormwater that happens during rain events. And then they're also improving our air quality through absorption of pollutants. And then through all of this, they're helping enhance public health. So they're making it safer and more enjoyable for us to spend time outside for recreation and spending time with each other. They also are impacted by climate change. So an example here is a tree that is a young tree that is experiencing drought. These photos are from authors of a paper that just came out of Western Sydney University, looking at the impacts of heat and stress on trees. And so this is an example of a leaf, kind of looking at the scale of a leaf and heat stress. So trees themselves are impacted by climate change. And in order for us to enjoy and really take advantage of all these benefits that we are really relying on for adaptation to climate change, we need our trees to survive and thrive. And so we need to take actions to reduce the vulnerability of our urban forest to climate change. And so we have been able to benefit from work that has been done by our colleagues at the Department of Energy and Environment, the agency here in DC. And so they put together this Climate Ready DC program back in 2016. And we know from this work that we can expect higher average temperatures in future climates. We can expect more extreme heat days. So those are days where temperatures exceed 95 degrees. We can expect 2 to 3 times the number of these extreme heat days by the 2080s. So this is really going to impact human health, public health. And then we can expect more intense and longer heat waves that happen more frequently. And then in terms of precipitation, we are anticipating having more intense rainfall events that happen more frequently. So all of these projected changes will be impacting trees. So trees will be experiencing stress through drought, extreme heat, weather events. So for example, this photo is from the National Mall, and not far from this last year, we had tornadoes coming through the National Mall. This photo here is showing flooding of the tidal basin where we have the iconic Japanese flowering cherries. Some of the responses of trees will be changes in phenology, so changes in seasonal events such as bud break. And then there can be additional responses, changes in growth rates in trees. And then there's kind of cascading impacts. So these secondary impacts such as, for example, pest outbreaks. So if you have warmer temperatures, if you have a longer growing season, you may have an insect that usually has one generation per year. Suddenly, they are able to have 2 generations per year and, defoliating trees. So there are lots of ways that trees are going to be experiencing these indirect and direct impacts. And so this is just a timeline showing our kind of process in learning about climate change impacts and then how we can address it. And so it started to some degree in 2018. On your left-hand side, that is an urban heat map that's showing the urban heat island. And this was a study conducted by Yturralde and colleagues in 2018. And so they recorded air temperatures across the District of Columbia. And so what you're seeing here is the urban heat island. So the darkest red colors are extreme temperatures, I think 102 degrees, and then the green temperatures are the coolest temperatures, 85 degrees. So you have a difference of about 17 degrees at the same time on the same day, depending on where you are in the city. So we were able to access this data and then leverage our tree inventory, overlay that tree inventory on top of the urban heat map here, and then really look at where it's hottest and make sure to prioritize tree planting. So those open tree spaces in blue, we would definitely want to get those scheduled for tree plantings, and then the scheduled tree plantings prioritize the ones that are in those extreme heat areas where we have the most the urban heat island. And then one thing I wanted to mention is, when you have this is showing the urban heat island, this will be exacerbated with climate change. So this will be even more intense for the areas where it's hottest. And we also want to consider not just the heat exposure, but heat sensitivity. So again, this is work done by Department of Energy and the Environment. This is from their Keep Cool DC plan 2022, and it is showing on the right-hand side an index that combines heat exposure, so that urban heat island, and then heat sensitivity, because not everyone experiences heat in the same way. And we need to consider that some people are more vulnerable to heat based on a number of different socioeconomic and demographic and health factors. And so that's what DOE put together in this index, those factors, along with heat exposure, urban heat island, air temperature, impervious surface, and then tree canopy. And so in the areas in the darkest kind of polygons, those are the highest heat sensitivity index, and that means that you have the most vulnerable populations there that are also experiencing extreme heat. And so this is actually how we are wanting to kind of address and prioritize tree planting. And we've incorporated this into our urban forest inventory and analysis data. So if you go into My City's Trees and look for Washington, DC, you can find this layer there. And so our kind of process in some ways started, well, kind of continued with adaptation planning, and this was done with the help and support of the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science. So, and the U.S. Forest Service, they provide this really amazing online adaptation planning course. So we signed up in 2020. There were several of us. We met for the class every week, and then a second time to look into, to kind of do the homework. And this was really important in helping us understand impacts of climate change and then actions that can be taken. So we also made a lot of great contacts at NIAX, and we worked with them to look at our tree list and better understand vulnerability there. So here is the list that they developed for us. So we took our list of trees that we both plant and have in our inventory, shared it with them, and they were able to put together this climate vulnerability assessment. So what you see here, and I can share this in the chat. What you can see here is climate vulnerability. It ranks from low to high under two different emission scenarios. So under low and high emission scenario. And this vulnerability is really a function of the urban adaptability of tree species and then the zone suitability. So how well matched is a particular species to the heat and hardiness zones in the district that are projected in the future. So not now, but looking into the future with climate change. And so from this list, we wanted to kind of apply it. So we took it, applied it to our street tree population. And so what you're seeing here is the colors indicate the climate vulnerability. So red is worse, high vulnerability, to dark green, which is low vulnerability to climate change. On the y-axis, this is the proportion of trees in our street tree inventory that fall into those categories. So for the low emission scenario, we had about 10% of our trees that had moderate to high vulnerability. When you look at the high emission scenario, it increases to about 25%. So our next step was to kind of figure out, okay, how do we change this? Basically, how do we shift more of our tree inventory into those green layers, into the low, moderate to low vulnerability? And so this is very much a group effort. We wanted to come up with kind of a climate ready tree list for DC. So we had a series of discussions in urban forestry divisions. So everyone was invited, anyone who wanted to participate. We didn't just want to consider climate because we had a lot of other information and data. So we also included the tree atlas. This is a really great resource that the U.S. Forest Service has. So we use that as well. We have this pest vulnerability matrix that was developed for us by Dr. Sunshine Brosi, based on an earlier matrix from 2008 by Latchin and McBride. And so we had that to rely on. We also have like 24 urban foresters in our division. And so we wanted to take advantage of all of that expertise. A number of people have been working here in the district for over 10 years. So it's a lot of important local knowledge. And then we have a tree mortality study of young trees. So we could consult that when needed. And so together we used an online form to look at each individual species, gave it a ranking that we assigned a ranking, compiled kind of all of those rankings together. That's what you see in the pie, kind of that pie chart there. And then we looked at that tree species and decided based on those rankings, whether we wanted to increase planting that tree, keep planting at the same levels, or maybe reduce the number of trees we plant for that particular species. And so the resulting list is shown here on the right. So the column in green, those are tree species that we chose to plant more of, to promote. That's about 27% of the species that we reviewed. 37% of the species we reviewed are in yellow in the middle, and those are kind of neutral. We aren't going to like prioritize them necessarily, but keep planting. And the trees species on the right in red, 36% of the species we decided to pull back from planting as much, kind of deprioritize. one important thing to include is that we didn't prohibit any species from planting, we just wanted to not plant as many. And it's hard to see, but there's an asterisk applied to about several trees here, and that just indicates that those particular species are only appropriate for certain environments. So, for example, a tree species that we want to promote, we would only want to plant in maybe they were only appropriate in a park or in a school or library campus, but not appropriate for like a median. So we wanted to have just a little bit of flexibility there. And so this was a list that we came up with. We wanted to put it into practice and use it, not just have like a PDF. So we had an opportunity. So we have this dashboard that was developed for us. And so this is, there's a lot going on here, but I can walk you through. So it's an ArcGIS dashboard, and we worked with a really great contractor who specialized in ArcGIS and web development, who put this together. This is not live, so these are just screenshots, but what you see here is diversity of tree species based on different scales. So if you look down at the bottom, you'll see trees in DC, approximately 180,000 trees. So those are all of our trees that are publicly owned. And we wanted to use this to kind of add in that last like missing link, which is diversity. So we have already addressed climate, pests and pathogens, performance here in DC, and then of course, diversity is a really great way to enhance resilience. So we wanted to look at diversity at different scales. This is at the scale of the entire city. Now I'm kind of drilling down, looking at a ward. So now if you look at those squares in Ward 7 there in the middle here, there's about 30,000 trees. You can see there's 70% quercus. If you drill down even more, now we're at basically the scale of a neighborhood. And in this neighborhood, there are about 1,000 trees. So if you look at the square, this is SMD, that stands for single member district. These are political boundaries, essentially. You'll see the diversity is a little bit different than the city as a whole. And this is kind of what we wanted to look at, is the diversity at the genus level in a neighborhood, because that's where people live. So now we can see which trees are more represented, underrepresented, and then move over, tab over, and now we can see the distribution and really fine tune it and look and see, okay, which trees, species are there the fewest of? So for example, Kentucky coffee tree, there are a few of those trees. We would take that, we would go back to our dashboard, not dashboard, but our list, our priority list, and look to see where it falls. And it is one of the tree species that we want to promote more of. So this would be a good choice in this example. So we tried this out. It's a little bit more challenging to do this when you're kind of in the field. So we wanted to see, like, how does this work? So we had an opportunity this past fall to try it out. And so we had made 5,200 tree selections. These are trees we chose for planting in 2022 to 2023, so currently. And when we applied our priority list, we found about 6% fell into that category where we're wanting to plant fewer of. So about 300 trees, so it's really not that bad. And then we asked everyone to use the dashboard, the support tool I just had, and we had applied a layer that showed where those tree species were to kind of review. And we had about 52% of those species change. So that was actually, I think that was a pretty good outcome. Here are some examples of the species that were changed. So, flowering dogwood to Allegheny serviceberry, little leaf linden to Kentucky coffee tree, and then sassafras to hackberry. So our next steps are to do a second kind of analysis or review of our climate vulnerability after an entire planting season. So we can do kind of a before and after comparison to see after a full planting season, have we shifted more of our inventory, more of our trees into low vulnerability, into that low vulnerability category, and or are we planting the trees that we said we wanted to, the priority list. And then we have access recently to urban forest inventory and analysis data. So those are plots that that summarize forest composition across the entire city, so all land ownerships. And we'd like to apply the climate vulnerability to that data. And then just to close it out, in terms of recommendations, I would say start where you're at, kind of. So in a particular city or whatever area you're working in, there are already so many resources that other agencies, maybe even your agency, has done in terms of climate change and climate adaptation. So we had a lot of really great resources to start from. And then next, I would recommend to reach out to the U.S. Forest Service, to the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science, because they are, the experts in this. They are super helpful. They have online training and resources. They host the Tree Atlas, which is a great online tool. We also, through our contacts at NIAX, they connected us with other cities. So, for example, we were able to connect with colleagues in Minneapolis, Milwaukee, and Austin, and we've been getting together for calls every 6 months. We have this kind of community of practice where we talk about our needs and our challenges related to climate change adaptation and urban forest management. And it's been a really great experience to talk to these other folks, to get to understand other people are going through the same thing, and to share successes, which has definitely happened. So thanks to everyone in those cities. And thank you for listening. And I just want to acknowledge all of the support and resources from the Department of Energy and the Environment, their Climate Ready DC plan, Northern Institute of Applied Climate Sciences, and the U.S. Forest Service. And then, of course, everyone in Urban Forestry Division who is part of every single step and process in our kind of work to understand and address climate change. And thank you, and I'll stop sharing.